I'm Laura, and I'm one of the co-founders of Greenspace NYC and Civic Art Lab, and I'm also over with the New School in Columbia University.
I'm Jeff Casper. I am a socially engaged artist, work with communities, founded this project with Laura. I also teach at Queens College, Parsons, and Pratt, community engaged practices for artists and designers. So,
And today we're going to talk about Greenspace NYC and Civic Art Lab, which is our volunteer art and design and sustainability collective. I also put down some of the call for this year's lab on your seats, and I'm a little short on a few, so you can share and look along too. And we're going to talk about some of the work we've done over the past 7 years, which has culminated in about 150 free workshops, exhibitions, and events on this intersection of sustainability, design, and art.
yeah, so I just want to give you a little bit a background about what it is that Civic Art Lab does and is. So we founded as for a very long time, we operate as a collective that traveled to different places pretty much on a monthly basis to gather conversation around this sort of question about like what are creative solutions to sustainability, what are people doing in neighborhoods, what are artists doing, how are they contributing, and we evolved into this format called Civic Art Lab, which is a traveling sort of I call it like an annual, sort of like an annual plant. It pops up in different neighborhoods in New York City for a period of time every year, but it does some specific things. So Civic Art Lab is a traveling community space for neighbors to share initiatives and skills related to community building, sustainability, and I mean like New Yorkers from all backgrounds. Anyone's invited. Artists, maybe a keystone of Civic Art Lab is artists, designers, and sustainability professionals who want to get involved with the public directly to create art together while like kind of questioning things together about what sustainability means. And it's also a space for like experts like engineers or environmentalists who are often siloed, and we'll talk about silos in our conversation, in their discipline, which may be saving us and being amazing, but they want to get involved in creative ways with the public to share their skills. So.
And one thing I'll add to that too is that a lot of the participants are either still in school or they're recent graduates of school, or they've been doing this for their entire career. So it tends to be pretty diverse in terms of who's participating.
For sure. And just before we move into the next part, I just like to talk about the ways that we work actually, and what the project does on big scales. It creates a space for arts and design-based research. So thinking about things like social scientists or scientists would do, but through art making, which is a tangible way to learn. It addresses other ways that we learn. Public engagement, which is bringing conversations around how do we do stuff together in a public space and negotiating that. It's a key aspect to democracy. Peer-to-peer teaching, which is like one of our number one, without that, there wouldn't be a Civic Art Lab, which means that I'm not an expert, or I am an expert, and you're an expert in things that you know. We're gonna teach each other rather than creating what's happening now, which is sort of like, I'm the teacher, you're the student dynamic. It's more like, we're both the students together kind of thing. And we're going to share what we know and negotiate that. And then cultural organizing, which is a fancy way to say to use cultural activities like art to actually get together around political and social issues. So it's like a low barrier to entry because you're doing things that are super creative while talking about things that you care about. So those are the ways that we work.
The lower barrier of entry tends to work as a pretty good trigger in getting people to understand fairly complex concepts about sustainability.
So I'm just going to click next, and it should actually just rotate slides. We won't be addressing like specific slides directly, but Laura will introduce how the next part of the talk is going to go.
The slides are our backdrop.
Yeah.
And so as part of the process of reflecting on what we do and why we're sitting here like this, we have designed this informal dialogue, or I guess semi-formal, really. And we are going to talk about this in dialogue. So I think that with a group of information scientists and librarians, we have hopefully a rapt audience for a dialogue.
Should I sit over there? Are we cool? No.
No, I think we're okay.
We're being a little theatrical today. Oh, it's my turn first.
That's
so,
your turn.
yeah. So today we wanted to talk a little bit about our experience about putting together Civic Art Lab, which is going on to its 4th year, and it will be this year in Chinatown.
That's right. We'll be at the Chinatown Soup, and we definitely encourage you all, if you're interested, to apply or give a talk, lead an event. Our 4th lab will, as just mentioned, continue in New York City, and for this particular conversation, we want to reflect on our first lab, which was held in the Bedford-Stuyvesant neighborhood. Our first lab was the focal point of our exhibition and that we held in the University of Gießen, Germany, where we were able to spend some time reflecting on this immense amount of, or I would say this flurry of workshops and events that we held.
So one thing that immediately comes to mind is that when we were in Bed-Stuy, and this is the Bed-Stuy space, by the way, these are people making the space, constructing it through discarded materials. One thing that come to mind, one of the events that I think about was an event led by Andrew Hayner, who's speaking later today. He's an architect. He solicited filmmakers from around the world to submit short films and animations that were all related to sustainability issues, and we screened about 10 of them. And that was everything from like metaphorical interpretations of climate change to interview-style documentaries on agriculture. And it was a really interesting way to bridge local concerns with like global issues.
The film festival had about 120 applicants. There was, at the time we held our lab, and then, what was I going to say? Oh, sorry. There were quite a few films and animations about how climate change and sustainability are affecting our lives.
Another memorable exhibit, actually, that happened in part of Civic Art Lab, and just as a refresher, or maybe I didn't mention it, Civic Art Lab, it composes of events that people lead or exhibitions that they want to put up. So it depends on how you want to communicate. Do you want to make things or do you want to show things? So, one of the really memorable ones, and you'll see images coming up, you'll know when I say this, was this exhibition we put on called my Long Island accent's coming out, Bad Hair Uprooted.
So this was a celebration of black hair follicles, highlighting social injustice as it pertains to hair. And this featured the work of Muriel Leong.
And the exhibition looked at how black women and black men and gender nonconforming folks actually are forced to socially adhere to standards about hair that use particular products that are unhealthy and hold them to a white and Caucasian standard. These types of hair treatments are also, super toxic to the environment. And through this exhibition, which we help our neighbors create, actually brought up a lot of issues that we wouldn't have necessarily thought about related to sustainability.
In this case, we really learned how deeply entwined sustainability is in health issues, personal, public, cultural. Her exhibition drew from Black culture and the identity of Bed-Stuy, which is really deeply ingrained in the neighborhood's rich history.
And one thing that I want to say is, and you can catch a glimpse of it in these images, is having a neighborhood space like this was really allowed us to sort of sit and listen to what people want to talk about, and we don't really have community spaces where folks can broadcast with their public, with their neighbors, with their family about what they're thinking about. So
overall, the Bed-Stuy neighbors were enthusiastic to participate in the first lab, and they held exhibitions and workshops in a spontaneous fashion, so that was exciting. We kept adjusting the curriculum based on this, and this was supported by the notion of a community-based sustainability situated in a storefront where people can visibly observe what you're doing in a neighborhood.
And also to contribute, to argue, to adjust a narrative, to figure out how to get involved in things that, maybe you didn't even realize your neighbor was doing.
For the final event of our lab, stickman of the hip hop group Dead Prez. Does anyone own the album? Yes. Okay. Yeah. Um, prepared one of the most thorough, thoughtful PowerPoint presentations on sustainability and living healthy. He rapped a little bit, but mostly he's such a good presenter. So that was really great.
And yeah, I was really interested in this idea of like thinking about hip hop as a bridge into holistic living culture and lifestyle. There we are. Yeah, yeah. Now we're catching up. Um,
There it is.
So it really the presentation on holistic living really resonated with Bed-Stuy residents, and we even had folks who came out as far from Newark to see this presentation because it was so unique. And to hear a famous hip hop artist discuss how he lives life with concerns of issues from healthy living, self-care, building self-esteem, and focusing around organic foods was super inspiring. There is an image of Stickman somewhere. He'll come up. Maybe he did already.
Yep. I was really, we were also really interested in his meditation practices. He leads a running group in his neighborhood, and he's part of quite a few community events where he lives in Atlanta. And for me also, he's been my motivator when I go running. I think a stick man. So.
Another crowd favorite in Civic Art Lab in Bed-Stuy was Zoe Hart, who is a Brooklyn-based artist. Her project called Studio Subway, which was a workshop that involved engaging people directly where they usually are, sitting on the subway during a commute, and thinking about that space as a way to build mindfulness practices, meditate, focus, build observation. And in Zoe's workshop, participants could take the time to center themselves and then bring that practice into other types of environments.
I wish I could center myself on the subway like that. I still struggle with that a little bit. We also had some traditional environmental science education classes as well. One of the presenters who you'll meet later today, who's an architect, Andrew Hayner, led a LEED certification course at no cost. Dan Bourbeau created a climate school offering walk-in climate change education twice a week. And A. Bernadette, who is also represented here by Andrea. There she is, though, yes. And Andrea and her organization, A. Bernadette, led a class on composting.
Yeah. So there's also, and you saw in the first slide, it involved a lot of making the furniture and fixing the things that were in the space. So like everything that we had in the space was actually like pretty much donated raw material and made, which is super cool. And then in the Bed-Stuy space, we were there for every day for like 2 months. It felt like a family business, which was pretty awesome. And it was structured like a family business, traditional storefront. And it was, yeah, it was great.
And then since we hosted this first one in Bed-Stuy, we've hosted 2 more.
So after Bed-Stuy, we set up shop in East Village in Alphabet City for 2 years. We were, like I said, we pop up. We're not there for 2 years all the time, but we went to the same space. Yeah.
So it was a specific choice to move to a more central location in Manhattan. But the East Village and Alphabet City have such a historic identity in art, music, and furthering sustainable causes that it was a good place to temporarily pop up and call home. And there still is a distinct economic divide in the area, in spite of its being culturally vibrant.
When we think about the projects, think about the places where Civic Art Lab takes place or calls home momentarily, we think about places that are also have robust histories in community activism, because we want to remind ourselves that people have been for a really long time fighting for sort of community-led sustainability. So moving to the East Village, we were really interested in the exchange of cultural practices, the long history of activism, whether that's community gardens, which we mentioned in the previous talk, squatting, urban homesteading. So we're going on to our 4th year, and like I said, we're moving to not too far from East Village to Chinatown, but yeah.
So this was also a choice to considerably downsize the length into a week or a long weekend. It means we offer about 13 to 15 workshops and events versus like 40 to 50. This is more manageable in many ways in terms of finance, grant writing, and fundraising. And I think for the type of format that Civic Art Lab is, it's been good for us.
Yeah, so from the first year where we were in Bed-Stuy, and we were there for 2 months, a little more than 2 months, and we pared this down to sort of like a really condensed long weekend or half of a week, we started to think about like what are different modes of long-term engagement. And in the Bed-Stuy space, we were able to be there and sort of like listen to a space and see if people want to come in and learn things over that period of time. But in the East Village, it was a lot about like creating a yearly, almost like festival or burst of energy that people expect to come back each year.
So we've had a lot of surprises along the way, and Jeff, what have you been the most surprised about over the course of our project?
So, like, full disclosure, Laura and I are like designers and artists, and we're academics. So we think about like things like sustainability in academic-y terms a lot. So I was full disclosure, I was surprised to learn how much issues of sustainability do register on the everyday lives of people. And that is not to say that I didn't think that it would not that I didn't think it wouldn't matter, but more so I was interested in how they manifest in everyone's everyday practice. For example, the reference to how it manifested in the exhibition on black hair. That was a very specific everyday situation that I wouldn't have thought about, and it's beyond hot topics like recycling and clean energy, but still part of the same conversation. And if we really sit down and think about what it would take to live a sustainable life, we would also have to think about the self and the cultural implications of things like hair and the materials that construct our everyday life. That's something that continues to surprise me.
Yes, the fact that it permeates pretty much every part of my from the time I wake up to go to sleep is what continues to surprise me. And taking the additional time to think about food, clothing, the air, the water, everything, just really thinking about where everything comes from all the time. But I've also been very impressed with the friendships that have emerged from Civic Art Lab. So met really wonderful people who we're very close to today. So I'm very grateful for that, for the friendships.
And I'm also really surprised that people really do every day lead forward the spaces that we need to experiment with and share our resources. And that the community spaces like Civic Art Lab really help to de-silo each other and de-silo disciplines.
De-silo being an interesting word. It's not necessarily every day that environmental scientists get together with an upcycling artist and then you grab an architect from somewhere and we all get together. So I think that labs in general that encourage these connections are really important. And we see a lot more young children registering to participate with their families. In terms of pedagogy, the instructors do a phenomenal job with the curriculum design. And so we always ask for these hands-on constructivist approaches to the way things are taught, from going on walks to visiting city gardens to looking at shorelines.
And most of our workshops, like I mentioned, always encourage participants to build something. In Bed-Stuy, a woman came by to reflect on one of our workshops on composting, and she's mentioned that her grandson had never used his hands in that way before, and since then he couldn't stop talking about composting. Which, whoa. Yeah, definitely learned a lot on that.
So you were mentioning Zoe Hart, who also led the studio Subway, and in another iteration, she taught students to weave. And the students continue to weave in their free time and in between workshops. I think the tactility of weaving was a really cathartic activity, and all the materials were upcycled. And I think in this case, you really take complex topics and express them through your hands.
Yep. basically, that's sort of like the mission statement of Civic Art Lab is hands-on activities through design about sustainability in an everyday space like a storefront that situate this information on an approachable scale. I think that that's pretty incredible, and that continues to surprise me every day.
And over the years, too, when we think about the type of activities and the space we're running, I think actually reflecting back, we thought that this was like going to be a temporary project, and that maybe sustainability would fall in line with mainstream concerns, and everyone would care. And that doesn't seem to be the case, and so we're still doing this. And I think it's even become more of a concern, and it's more urgent at this point.
We still need community spaces that are non-institutional, that are grassroots, and that are do-it-yourself. And I think that cultural traditions and futures are completely smashed up against each other. And we have a lot of realities that people still need to talk about and work through in terms of sustainability. And yeah, there's a lot of denial. And I think, we need to open spaces to work through that.
Yes, there's a lot of Trumpian climate denial, and we're at a very specific moment in time right now where we're essentially backpedaling, in fact. So even though we're 7 years into this project, we're still working through a lot of the similar conversations, but these are definitely not conversations that we ever get bored of. I think that thinking about these issues locally and a global scale will continue to be extremely important. So.
And we're in a space where we need to redefine what we want the future to be. Perhaps we're in a crisis period, and there's a lot of space for imagination and the need for experimentation in this moment.
So, Jeff, what do we think are some of the benefits of creating this type of informal education space in different communities of New York City?
With Civic Art Lab, people teach each other on a more casual basis. They share resources. Our participants learn about sustainability together. There's always been a type of dynamic with a project that anyone can walk in, and usually projects are intergenerational. Events are intergenerational.
Informal learning is fun. It is. Informal learning is fun, and I think that it's really great to see people teach and share something that they feel passionate about. And this model eliminates a lot of the nitpicking and micromanaging, and it's more about delegation and being supportive.
We do have committee meetings every year, which I welcome you to join, where we invite the public to join in on the project. We talk about like what happened. We're a non-institution, but I'll use the term institutional memory, like what had happened before and what's open to happen in the future, and we are very open. And in those committee meetings, often that's where we learn what people have to share, and usually it's something that you don't think you could teach someone else. And that's another empowering part about doing a project like this.
And I think as part of that empowerment and visualizing community, this reminds me of a few of the workshops we've had too, that not only does this work within the gamut that we've already spoken to, but or it expands also into community and data mapping, and really thinking about what that means in terms of sustainability. And that reminds me of work by Andrew DeRosa, and then, or it also brings me to think about really just upcycling everyday objects. And this is something that Zoe Hart took a look at in her workshops, which is, really transforming the ordinary as much as you can all the time.
For example, like the previous presentation, like what are things that you have already in your space that can become other things? And artists are thinking about that all the time. That's why we always collaborate with artists. Beyond our lab, it's critical for educators to rethink how waste and sustainability factor into their job, in that you don't necessarily need to be a director of policy or sustainability management to make change happen. In our everyday lives, we can adjust, contribute to larger systematic improvement. There's so much change that can happen. Sometimes it's not a big leap, it's not as big of a leap as it seems, and it's easy to be like, oh no, what am I going to have to do? Give up everything that I have or my lifestyle.
Right, yeah, simple terms are good. You don't necessarily want to go around and be like, well, in my household where I have a circular economy, this is how I deal with my inputs and my outputs. So you can really think of just like small incremental things you could do around your house, like, you know, what are some simple things I can do? So I do think that, really looking at this as just being a necessary, basic, everyday thing is just really important to us. And that, as we've said many times within our lab, that sustainability should not be considered a luxury good.
This concept about sustainability should not be considered a luxury good. That factors into some of our questions about the dangers of doing this type of work. And everybody's like, oh, the dangers? What? There's dangers? We're all vulnerable in this process, confronting truths about where we live, ourselves, history, science, and more. There's always going to be aspects that are uncomfortable. It's challenging to amplify the concerns of people who live in the neighborhoods that we work. I think that we try to be as people-focused as possible. It's important to consider how we continue to build spaces to amplify New Yorkers' voices, our neighbors' voices, from different backgrounds and different directions. There are many discourses around things like artistic production, artist galleries, entering neighborhoods, and fear to things like gentrification and displacement.
So it is a real challenge to pop up acknowledging the relationship between art, design, and gentrification, and what it can mean to reach an underserved population in a neighborhood who really might not want you there anyways. When are you doing good, and when are you an interruption, and how do you find a way to balance it in such a way that you really are part of the community authentically?
Yeah, and how to reach more people through different types of barriers, and how to go into a project with the support and direction from institutions, businesses, and organizations that we collaborate with. We don't ever want to be in a space where we're like, who's this new thing? Like, it's like we go in and be like, oh yeah, the bike shop's like, yeah, we totally know these guys. And like, the children's center across the street like brings people in, like part of the conversation for a longer period of time. We're not a surprise. We try not to be.
So that's meant spending time with our collaborators for a good amount of time before entering a space. So with the Bridge Street Development Corporation, we spend a good deal of time getting to know them and then meeting all the neighbors. At first it seemed like taxing. It's like, okay, got to go meet another business. But eventually, I mean, I still know a lot of these people. They're really cool. So like it felt like really taxing to like go to door and be like, hi, I'm going to be your neighbor. And but in the end of the day, like forcing yourself to go do that or even knock on your actual neighbor's door and say hi, it's really a very sustainable practice.
Sometimes it feels tiring. To be linked up with local business, which we do often, mom and pop businesses or small nonprofits that mentor businesses, that's usually the route we go. Basically, we have conversations with the folks in neighborhoods who've been there for a long time and who have been thinking about these things. That sort of gives us momentum to give everyone else momentum.
It's been one of our dreams to also build these partnerships in rural parts of America. This is something that we think about, but we haven't really done, and we're going to definitely accomplish this at some point. And you may notice in the recent years too, a lot of funding for sustainable projects will encourage this, of course, to really get out to much needed rural areas.
And us, we're closing soon, but aside from closing our talk,
Yeah.
aside from Manhattan and Brooklyn, we've worked in different peripheral parts of New York City, like the Rockaways and Queen, like out in Flushing. I don't think Flushing's peripheral, but some people do. We always want to start at a scale that's intimate to us and relevant to us, and we build a community project from that intimate space. And I do think more about how our work can travel and what that might mean for different people in different places and times.
This lovely group in Germany, they brought us out there, and we rebuilt part of the lab at the Gießen University, and we even brought some of
Very small city, yeah.
Brought some of the other lecturers who've been a part of this lab, and at some point, they asked us, some criticisms for us, or they're like, so so where are these artists? We're like, we brought the artists.
Yeah.
So just being sure to be really inclusive too. So if we're traveling, like we want to travel as a group and really bring everybody as much as possible. So.
And so we've been moving into doing lots of exhibitions or traveling types of work, and I like that because it gives us distance from what we do. Often we get so entangled in our daily lives and we're really exhausted from, the work that brings us to do this type of stuff. And reflection, also like today, which we thank you for helping us reflect, allows us to really boil down our ideas to the essentials and remember sort of everything that happens. We're kind of doing like an oral history of Civic Art Lab right here. And yeah.
But I think we're pretty good about meeting and reflecting and thinking about this. We barely text. We don't email too much. We pretty much just talk over the phone. No, we do. It's just so like I can hear Jeff's voice and he can hear my voice and.
It's not good to work for nearly 10 years together and just email, just as like.
Also, email sounds really angry.
Yeah.
So you're like, why are you upset with me, Jeff? God, we've been
Tips for
collaborating for 10 years. Is the band going to break up?
Yeah.
So, yeah. But yeah, I think reflection is an important tool.
Yeah, and that's really like all we got today. We're here for your questions, yeah. Yeah.
How do you decide what neighborhoods you want to work with? Because I'm thinking it could be a nice collab with the Northern Manhattan Arts Alliance, because they have their art local studios happening right now, but it could be nice
That's wonderful.
with them to bring Civic Art Lab together.
We talk with people we know, and we talk to businesses that we know are local businesses throughout. It doesn't matter the neighborhood, and usually from that kind of conversation, we figure out like where's that space in your neighborhood that you would love to see a community space, and we try to build around that. So that's amazing. We would love to come up to uptown. That would be awesome. I went to school up there, so I love it.
This year's lab at Chinatown Soup too was developed through this conversation. They do a lot of gentrification conversation. So the idea that they are, well, actually, okay, there's a few criteria. It's always a storefront that we use, so it's actually not like a random location. It's a storefront, but also a mixed-use space, also run by somebody who's engaging with sustainability practices, and also aware of gentrification issues. So that actually is part of the criteria.
For example, in Chinatown, like you mentioned, we're very aware of the different activism and struggles around housing rights and gentrification. So to be in collaboration and support organizations and businesses who are working on that already, helps not to place pressure on them, but actually use our platform to continue other types of conversations. So that's usually how we try to work. Yeah, thank you. Any other questions? Thank you.